Well, this week is the Super Bowl, so today we are talking about sports. How should Christians think about sports? Are they a healthy thing for our community, or have they become a god? And we're also going to talk about sports betting. Is that okay or not? Let's get into it. Welcome to Sage Reverie, a podcast where we seek to live well and live wisely. I'm Mike Wilson.
And I'm Wes Smith.
We live in the great state of Wyoming, and each week, from a biblical perspective, we discuss a trending topic and what others are saying about it. If you're using these episodes for your group, there are discussion questions in the description, and for more information about our ministry, visit church307.com. So, hello, I am Mike Wilson. I'm sitting here with Wes Smith, the sage himself. Wes is a Broncos fan.
Yes, I am.
So it is
proud with my orange water bottle today. I'm still, but man, I think it's been since 2016 since we've had a winning season.
Since you had Manning himself.
Yes.
Things have not gone too great for you guys.
Not gone as well.
Yeah. I'm a big Chiefs fan, and so it's gone better for us.
Yes, you've had a good run.
Yeah.
You drafted Michael Jordan.
We did.
That worked out well.
Got lucky. Yeah. He has treated us well. Sports, I'm a sports guy. Like, I love watching sports. Probably my primary sport that I watch is the Chiefs football, NFL football. I also I'm a big Kansas Jayhawk basketball fan.
I'm a Jag fan, so we've had a good run.
Yeah, we have
had a good run.
Yeah, when we're talking about basketball.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Let's differentiate that a bit.
Not quite as good. Yeah. I grew up in a house where, Dad, I love you, but the Jayhawks might have been our second god.
Okay.
It took precedent over just about everything. It maybe still does a little bit too much, but my grandma, I remember growing up, my grandma hated sports to the core. If anybody was watching sports in her home or a home she was in, she would literally go unplug the TV and steal the cord. Like,
really?
She hated it. If you watch sports at all, she thought all sports watching was across the line.
Cross the line.
You're worshiping those guys. Stop worshiping those guys on that court. Yeah. It's not okay. So today we're going to kind of talk about how have we done in balancing sports. Do you feel like, is it okay for a Christian to even cheer for a competition, or are we meant to be more gentle and kind and respectful? Like, how should Christians moderate all the biblical advice about being, gentle with this competitive culture that we are in?
Yeah, I'm going to come pretty pro sports.
Okay.
Right? Like I've preached the sermons about priority, and I get it that just like everything else in our life, we can get out of whack. But boy, I actually think sports have brought a lot of positive things to our culture, and I do not think when Jesus talks about meekness or gentleness or those kind of things, that is not the context that he's referring to. Yeah. That those two aren't relative to each other.
So meekness is not weakness.
And competition, the idea of competition is nowhere in Scripture referred to in a negative light.
And you got Paul talking about fighting the good fight.
Yeah, running the race, fight the good fight. Absolutely. It's these things were thought of positively in Paul's world.
He says, I beat my body and I make it my slave.
Yeah.
When I look at
that's some real life conditioning, it sounds like to me. Holy cow.
He did not hold back.
No.
You assume at that point of his career? I don't know. You assume at that point in his life, he is beaten.
Yes.
Like, you talk about all the stonings and beaten with rods and shipwreck and all the things that had happened to Paul by this time. He knew what beating his body looked like. And he's like, the body is a tool that I will use to accomplish a greater good. And when you hear a description of what God is doing in our world, one of my favorite passages in Scripture talks about God in Revelation, God being victorious, and He is worthy to open the scroll. And all through Scripture, you see this picture of God being the victor. He is the champion. And so part of the reason why we get so excited about our faith is we believe we're on the winning team.
Yeah.
Like we read the back of the book type stuff and we win in the end. And so, our God is definitely not a weak, passive God, the way a lot of people think of him as being, but he is gentle and he is kind. And so I think when you talk about the balance of sports and life, I see this need for moderation all the way through Scripture.
Absolutely. In every arena.
Let's not swing the pendulum.
Yeah, right.
Let's just recognize the value of both.
Yeah. So good can be made into bad if it gets dysfunctional in ways that it does become an idol or a god. But you put children together.
Yep.
In a yard. Yeah. What are they going to do? They're going to play a game.
Yeah.
They're going to compete. There is within us this creativity and this desire for recreation that God speaks about of himself, I believe in Job. I just think that's a God-given desire and part of us. And of course we take like sex, like lots of things. Food, we can make good things bad, of course, but let's not rail on the good things. Let's enjoy what God gave us and keep them in their place, but let's enjoy them.
I think I would probably fall down on the side more that we've made sports too much of a god. Like I would probably lean more that direction than you do. Okay. Just because I've seen how much people have allowed it to cause them to make unhealthy decisions in their time with their family and their kids' success has become success in sports have become so incredibly important to their.
But if it wasn't sports, it would have been something else, right?
True.
It would have been music.
Yep.
Another good thing.
Yep.
That you can do the same. It would have, I think sometimes we pick on the sort of the thing that it turned out to be that they chose instead.
Right.
And not the deeper problem that was inherent in that, whether we're going to talk about gambling here and later.
Yeah.
It would have been something else. Fashion, music, you can
video games,
yep. You can pick anything you want.
Yeah.
And you see people go down that road. We can pick food, right? We could do a whole podcast just on the misuse of food.
Why'd you look at my stomach when you said that?
I don't know. Yeah. I just think
feel a little judged over here.
Yeah, right. You could point pets out in my like upland hunting dogs, right? You could talk to me about how I'm out of control with that or something. Yeah. You'd be wrong, but you could mention it. And I just when we pick on sports, there's something deeper. It's not sports. Right?
So probably you should pick a losing team so that you don't get quite
there
so
you
tempted
go. Maybe that's why I have this imbalance so perfectly in my life.
It's wisdom that makes you cheer for the Broncos.
Right. Christians are Broncos fans.
You should try to lose.
That's probably why.
Okay.
Right.
Oh, really?
That's
I don't think that's true.
Yeah, well.
Okay, I want to play a video for you that is a David Platt video.
Oh.
I've read David Platt's books and I watch his sermons. I hesitate a little bit because he has a temptation of being a little legalistic and judgmental and harsh at sometimes. And about half of his sermons, I'm like, I don't know if I would have gone that far. But this is what he says about Christians in sports.
Imagine for a moment that you live in another country, one completely foreign to this one. And you have an opportunity one fall to spend a week in Birmingham. So you come on a Sunday morning. And you observe many people, maybe even most, slowly rising to make their way to a building they call a church. They groggily approach that building for some sort of ceremony. Clearly, whatever happens at the beginning of that ceremony is not that important because most of the people don't come until after it has started. I'm not looking at anybody. Just saying.
That's true.
And so you watch them file in. And begin to mouth the words to songs, many of them almost expressionless, virtually emotionless. After which they sit down and passively listen to someone talk to them for a period of time. You notice people starting to get a bit fidgety, uneasy, as the time for the ceremony to end approaches. When it's finally over, they quickly walk out. But as you walk with them, you listen to them, and you hear many of them talking with one another about something that had happened. In this
scenario, this foreigner doesn't know what a church service is.
Yeah, right. And then laugh as they recount another ceremony they'd been to, apparently a bit more interesting than this one. A ceremony that happens apparently on Saturdays. In fact, the rest of the week, that's almost all you hear people talking about, the coming Saturday ceremony. Even the people who were at the Sunday ceremony are strangely silent about what they heard and sang about there, but very enthusiastic about the Saturday that can't seem to get here soon enough. So as your curiosity is piqued, you begin to eagerly anticipate the coming Saturday ceremony with them. That Saturday comes, and you see people wake up and leave their houses dressed in some sort of outfit that they love to wear for these types of days. Many of them drive out of the city, some an hour west, others a couple of hours south, where they gather together on what they call hallowed grounds for the Saturday ceremony. They get there early for this ceremony, way early, where they eat and drink and laugh and play, not just with their family or with their friends, but with complete strangers. You've never seen community like this. And when the time comes, they all, tens of thousands of them, enter a shrine together. You can't think of another word for it. Where they raise their voices with passion to applaud some sort of assembly of children they don't know playing a game on a field.
Children.
As that game begins, they shout and chant and sing until they virtually lose their voices, with far more passion than the previous Sunday's ceremony for sure. People don't look at their watches at this ceremony. They're so engulfed in what they're seeing and experiencing, they actually get excited when it goes into what they call overtime, because going long like this is a sign of a really exciting game. And the fun doesn't end after the ceremony is over anyway. When the boys that everybody has been cheering for win the game, the celebration has only begun.
Yeah, Alabama definitely college football. However, I heard Saban, is that his name?
Yeah, Saban
just
retired.
Dang.
Yeah, Saban just done. I actually spent quite a bit of time in Alabama, and man, it's a big source, but it's Alabama football. Holy cow.
It's a worship environment.
Oh, it's something. But yeah, I think he's done.
The whole time he was talking about that, I was sitting here thinking, that sounds awesome to me. Like he's talking about it like a negative thing.
Yeah.
The community, the fellowship, the excitement that brings together. Like it's cool to have that as a community. Mm-hmm. There are things that all really strong communities have in common that it's like, this is what makes us us. This is why Mitch is the guy behind the camera, by the way, or Grant is the guy behind the camera, are always making fun of us because we say, my team beat your team, as if we have some ownership or something.
Exactly.
But it does create this like fellowship, this camaraderie. So there's some value there, but have we allowed it to become too important, too valuable to us?
You know, sure. We can make that case. In the sense you like you said before, time, effort, energy, all should be priority for God first, right? I preached that sermon.
Yeah.
Right. But I think you have to address this with reality. Sunday morning church, it's God did not design it. It's not going to be a rah-rah every time. It's a habit. It's a reverent humility.
You say habit like a good thing, like it should be a habit.
Yeah. It's meant not to be. It's actually meant to have a little bit of ritual to it, and a little bit of
mundane.
Mundane reflection. It's not to compare it to a ball game. If you, how old are your kids now?
7 and 4.
7 and 4. So have they experienced sports yet? Have you experienced watching them in sports?
We do the soccer field. Well, they run around in that group of kids.
Right.
Ball of kids.
Well, when one of them breaks out and kicks a ball and you get a goal, you'll experience a joy that's different than church was intended to get you to experience every week.
Yeah.
It's to compare the two in our external reactions to the two is really false. Yeah. It's really, come on, the
emotions they produce should be different.
Yeah, it should be different. And the depth that we experience over time with Christ in worship, sports don't do that.
Yeah.
And so I've preached a sermon like this, right? And I know where he's going. You want to get people to show up on time and engage more fully and all that. But I don't know that the way to do that, you can make a point through sport. The way to do that is not to diminish the joy we have for our football team or whatever. Like that's not the issue. Right?
Yeah, I think though that the argument he would make, and I want to make a little bit, is when the loyalty to one infringes on the loyalty to another,
the other.
Tries to pull away the dedication you have to one, because you said, you should make church a habit. However, most don't. Yeah. And largely it's because I'm traveling with my kids to sporting events and they're on a club team that requires them to be on the road every day. So church got the boot and not the other. Yeah. Paul says everything is permissible to me, but I will not be mastered by anything. Mm-hmm. And so it's just kind of this big, and I'm not, you've preached that sermon, but it's kind of this, when it is taking away your loyalty to God, then it's gone too far. And I would say that in many cases, more so, in my opinion, more so I've seen it in kids sports and in high school sports. I've seen that happen more than I have in professional sports or watching sports on TV or whatever. But I think we
don't want our kids to miss out on opportunity.
Yep. Right.
And there's so much pressure now on parents to provide, and there's a deeper issue there than just sports around how we're going to raise our children in today's world. Mm-hmm. And so you feel pressured into that. And frankly, sometimes a local church has not yet persuaded somebody that raising their children with the habit of church is actually more beneficial to their future than having created a positive experience that sports can provide. So I agree with you. I think again, I would say let's not just criticize sports, but let's understand the deeper understanding of why somebody's making a poor choice that way. I kind of want to tip my hand on something too that's going to be a little bit unpopular, and it's college sports. And I'm not talking about the college sports you watch on TV. I'm talking about your small university that has a sports team that's going to give your kid $500 in scholarship to go spend $70,000 on school. It's just a marketing scheme. Yeah, it's a scheme.
I worked at a university where we had Oklahoma Wesleyan University. Big fan of the university, but when I was there, they have like 70% of your population on campus are there almost entirely for a sport that they're barely going to see the field, that they're it's pretty much a job that they have to work every single day, and they're being paid less than minimum wage because the scholarship they're getting as a result is like no money at all. I'm like, and we've done all this because we have created in our kids. I'm talking in extreme terms. I'm overly passionate about this topic because I've seen it cause pain in so many college students' lives because they went with this fantasy that they were going to be the star of their team. They were going to become the Super Bowl winning quarterback. I mean, they were all going to make it to professional sports. I have a friend who is a college soccer player at a small I got to be careful, at a small college, and he is convinced he's going to be a professional soccer player. I'm like, you're at a small college and you're not even the best on your team. Like, it's just not going to happen. But we've fantasized, and we raise our kids all the way from the 7-year-old soccer team to this fantasy to college. And at some point their life has to fall apart because this fantasy has to die because 0.00001% of them are going to actually have their fantasy fulfilled. Yeah,
you're right. I've seen it. I played college basketball.
You're going to tell me about the glory days?
No. My scholarship was maybe 25, 30% of what the tuition and room and board costs. So I get that. I sacrificed a lot, those 5 a.m. practices and then the 5 p.m. practice, and you're exhausted. And I'll never forget. I just did it 1 year because of that, right? Like, oh, wait a minute. In high school, they said, hey, you might play some semi-pro ball. You're going to be pretty awesome. And that just drove me. And at some point through college, just wait a minute. No. This isn't fun anymore. And this isn't that big. I remember my grandfather sitting me down, and I did not have one of those grandpas that played with you or whatever, right? It was just this goofy old man.
You say
Yeah, I did.
Uno. It's called Uno. He doesn't speak Spanish, by the way. It's the number one.
I'm learning. One word at a time. So I remember he sets me down though, because he was just kind of this like serious talk kind of grandpa. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Wes, I hear you're quite a basketball player." And of course, I'm not going to disagree, right? Like, yeah,
obviously.
Yeah. He says, God didn't create you to spend your life bouncing around ball. And then he just left, right? And I didn't really like that conversation at the time. I was a senior in high school and all that. But like 2 or 3 years later, like, oh, yeah, he was actually right. And I got this out of whack. So I agree, man. I agree totally. In terms of it can get that way, and it does, and it causes a lot of hurt. Again, I would say it's not necessarily sport that's the problem. Yeah. It's what we've made and can make sport, right? So
yeah.
So
usually where our passions are, our money follows. Yeah. And when you're passionate about something, you put your treasure there and support that. And how that is playing out in our culture right now is sports betting is growing at crazy rates, like exponentially growing. And now it's become a form of online entertainment. And just about everybody I know is doing some sports betting on like one of the 95 new sports betting websites. Everybody's releasing one. And, so the question then becomes, okay, I mean, I'm pretty sure the Wesleyan church I grew up in said any betting at all is sin. We couldn't have a raffle in our church lobby because then we're going to hell.
Bingo was a no-go.
Oh, yeah. No cards or any of that stuff. And so now we've gone to where I'm pretty sure most of my friends are doing sports betting online. And so that pendulum has swung. You can't have any financial conversation, according to any Sunday school superintendent, without referencing Dave Ramsey.
Mr. Ramsey.
So we got to bring him into the conversation.
Today's question comes from Jason in Illinois. Jason writes, "My question is about income from a side hustle. I recently began sports betting and have built up a bankroll of about $4,000. So his side hustle is gambling. My wife and I have about $55,000 in total debt, excluding the house. We earn about $61,000 a year. I'm a saver," said the gambler. "My wife is a spender. We don't have a budget and need an additional $500 to cover our bills for the month. I have agreed to withdraw." This is my favorite sentence I've ever read on the show. "I have agreed to withdraw $250 a month from my sports betting account to help cover our shortage, but my wife would prefer I liquidate the account. Dave, what should I do?" Oh, man, this is a real person. Oh, man.
There's a human out there that really asked that.
If we don't say something stupid, we're going to be employed forever. Forever.
Oh, man.
All right, so Jason, you're not a...
Jason, you're not from the South. Around the South, we would say, bless your heart.
Bless your heart. So number one, gambling is not a side hustle.
Because you're not that good, you prideful, arrogant little jerk.
It's an addiction. It's an addiction. Number two, you're not a saver.
For him, he doesn't mince words.
You're a gambler. I sometimes, like, this guy sounds like he thinks he's not playing.
He thinks he's so good at it that it's a guaranteed income.
Yes.
That's what I meant by you arrogant, prideful little jerk. That's what I was saying. Yeah. There's an arrogance that goes with this type of addiction that he thinks he's the exception to the rule, and he thinks that MGM Grand was built by Santa Claus instead of by bettors who lost their butts to Caesar.
Right, in his palace. Yes. So liquidate this immediately, all $4,000. Put all $4,000, close all of your sports betting accounts. Take your wife out for a cheap meal and say you are sorry and that you have lied to her and you've been dishonest and you're going to go get help. And then go get a second job that you work for and that pays you every time.
And you earn money and stuff.
I feel like they made a lot of assumptions about that guy.
They kind of, yeah.
Because he does some betting does not mean he's necessarily addicted to it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, he might not be up for husband of the year, or he might not be like the Dave Ramsey poster child, but I think they might have gone a little farther.
It is funny. You saw the funniest part about that to me was that this guy was gracious enough to give his wife $250 a month to pay their debts.
Out of his betting fund. We might want to watch that again when we talk about marriage. There's a couple of things we could talk about there.
I think Dave Ramsey, though, it seems like, at least from that clip, that would draw the hard line, black and white, no betting. It's all wrong. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I don't know. But I have a strong hesitation to ever creating those just firm, unless Scripture overtly says it's a sin. I hate it whenever we try to add to Scripture and create rules that are not written there. Yeah. And so I get it. I'm all for wisdom and moderation and balance in our lives. That's valuable. But just creating an across the board, it's always sin. And if you do any betting, then you're obviously addicted to it. Like, no, it's, I mean, this is the same, in my mind, this is the exact same conversation as alcohol. So I got to be careful about having it because that's kind of a hot topic in our denomination. But if you're just creating a rule because you're trying to keep the extremists from going too far, then you're creating a rule that God intentionally did not create. He had the option of writing that rule. When he's creating his 10 commandments, he could have added an 11th that said no gambling. He could have added an 11th that said no drinking. He obviously did not do that. And so I have to put my opinion about it, what is a wise rule to place on your life, and say, for some reason, God didn't create that rule. And so if I feel called to not do this, then I will choose not to, and my family will choose not to because it's the head of our house, but I'm not going to enforce what I feel God is calling me to on everybody else.
And I would add, if I feel like there are those in my circle of influence that struggle, then for their sake, it'll become law in my life, right? Like I'll do that for those that I might influence. It become law in my life, and so you would know this, that as a ordained clergy in the Wesleyan Church, we have chosen, so that I'm not a regular in Vegas doing all kinds of stuff because of the circle of influence I have as a superintendent, right? I don't know that would be good. So we've agreed on some things. Law doesn't work. Right? Law just doesn't really work.
Yeah.
And I sometimes I think of Dave Ramsey as like the no fun person when we talk about money, and he's done a lot of good and he's actually had a positive impact in my life. So I want to be balanced, but in this discussion, whether it's sports or sports betting, I want to take the position of let's understand the underlying cause and be a little smarter than just law. Just like betting's bad, sports is out of control and it's bad. It's all bad. I bet on something the other day. I'll just admit that.
Okay.
It wasn't a sports financial bet. It was actually the Kansas-Kentucky game. Earlier in this season. Yeah, it worked out for me. But and the bet was, I'll do this if your team wins, and you'll do this if your team wins. One of those kind of bets. It was fun. It made the game more interesting.
You have more buy-in.
Yeah, you got more buy-in. It was fun. It didn't involve something that would lead to addiction on my part. I was wise about it. At least it hasn't led to addiction yet this year. So good. But I just, the law doesn't work. Yeah. We can self-restrain ourselves based on God's call, but
so are you naturally do you have an addictive personality? Are you the type that can get into something and just,
I think I can stop. Yeah. I feel like, for the most part, that's not been an issue in my life. There's been a thing here or there that say, hey, this is a little bit too much, you could talk about my passion for horse training, and you could talk about some hunting that I've done and some of those kind of things. And we all have to be mindful of what can get out of hand, right? But for the most part, no. But I have friends who do.
Yeah.
And we got to be careful.
I think that's the valuable thing, is knowing yourself and know what your tendencies are.
Yeah.
My tendencies go the opposite direction. I do not have an addictive personality. In fact, I'm like overly conscious of how I spend my time, overly conscious about how I spend my money. Like I can go the opposite extreme and be too legalistic with stuff and not allow myself to have a little bit of fun.
Yeah.
I would never gamble, just not because I'm judging anybody for it, because I'm cheap.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound fun enough for me to sacrifice my money.
Right.
And so I think knowing your tendencies and knowing how you could fall into temptation, this is what happens with alcoholism, is somebody doesn't recognize or allows them to go too far with it.
Yeah.
And so there has to be some wisdom there. I think you're talking about law doesn't work. A great example for me is when all this stuff about the sex abuse in the Catholic Church and all these priests were found out to have been done all these terrible things. My first reaction was, well, duh.
Yeah.
You forced a law on people that God didn't put on them, and they didn't. They weren't called to. I understand the idea of celibacy, but forcing all that larger group of men into celibacy
gonna be tough.
You're just asking for
It'll be tough.
Pain as a result of that legalism that you created, and so I'm not saying anything about Catholics. I just feel like we've got to be careful about creating a law that God didn't create, because we are going to have unintended consequences that we can't predict.
Yeah.
And if that consequence is pedophilia or whatever it is, because we enforced, what's the word I'm looking for? They can't get married.
Monasticism?
No.
You started with an M on something. I don't think it's that word.
Where a priest can't get married. Celibacy. Where we force celibacy on people that aren't called to celibacy.
Yeah.
We're just inviting problems when we create law that God didn't create.
Yeah. Yeah. You're exactly right. We have to be very careful. I think of food in this conversation. God made it so that we have to eat to live. And yet food can be so incredibly destructive. Gambling can be, God didn't create gambling for us to live, but it's one of those things. Sports, all the good things in life, you just be careful.
Yeah.
You just use wisdom. You live with wisdom. And when we don't live with wisdom, then we have to be restrained. You're going to hate this analogy, but I train animals, right?
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, well, it's wonderful. and we learn a lot through the training of our horses and our dogs, and you should try it. It's the best. But
like how they have no soul or conscience.
It's when the more a horse that I'm training will choose to do something that's in his best interest, the more freedom I give him, right? So in essence, the wiser he gets, the more freedom he gets. And I think in so many ways, God has
you could make that same analogy with kids. You don't have to bring horses into it.
You could, but horses is just better. See, so but the more God has sown wisdom in my heart, the more freedom I can have.
Yeah.
See, and so I think the more immature and the more I'm operating in life without wisdom, the more I need law, the more I need lots of no's in my life, right? Gambling, sports, I just need hard boundaries and no's. And you mentioned, you can take numbers of things. Food is the reason I bring food up. But the more I start to live with wisdom and discipline, the more mature I become as a Christ follower, the less I need rules.
Yeah.
The more free I could be to gamble on the Jayhawks game.
Yeah.
Or be a fan of whatever sports team. This freedom comes with that. And so I hope God is doing in me as I get a little older now.
I think that's part of the wisdom in telling people that they can't do certain things until certain ages, like putting a restriction on drinking until 21 or smoking or whatever it is. I feel like those restrictions are wise because number one, our brains are not yet developed. Our bodies can't handle it like we can later in life. But at the same time, it allows time for wisdom to be developed. The other day, my kid goes, I'm going I can't remember how he said it, but he was like, I can't wait till I'm an adult. So like, till I can do everything I want to do.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, that is an immature. That's what you think when you're younger.
Right.
And then you get older and you begin to realize I could do a lot of things that I recognize now I don't want to do.
It was really great that at 16, I could only afford to buy a car that could go 50 miles an hour top speed. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
is that a true story?
It is a true story.
Funny. Yeah.
If I could have afforded something that I had a Ford Escort that thing had to have like 70 horsepower total. And I did everything you can do with the Ford Escort, but it wasn't much. And then I had an old 72 truck. Man, if I could have afforded more, I would not be alive today. Right. Yep. Thank God for his limitations on our lives in so many ways. Yeah. So, yeah.
You next time you tell that story, you should really start it off with, when I was 15, I got an Escort.
Okay. I got a Ford Escort. Yeah. Oh.
Age brings wisdom, and there are multiple things that I think it is valuable for us to say, let's restrict this activity because we've recognized its potential for addiction or its potential to cause pain. I think about things like guns or alcohol or drugs or gambling, addictive possible things. However, there's some things that you can't necessarily do that with, like eating. It's like, so what do we need? We need oversight.
Yeah.
We need wisdom from outside of us. We need an adult that can tell us, okay, don't eat sugar all the time. You've got to eat some greens and some meat.
And wisdom sometimes is knowing where I need that accountability and where I don't need the accountability. There's some areas in my life I need accountability on. There's some areas I don't need accountability on this, right?
Yeah.
So,
For my wife and I, we've now for years had an accountability software on my computer.
Yeah, sure.
Because I recognize my temptations in life. And so she has this program that takes a screenshot of my computer at random times. And so that boundary that is set that from that wisdom outside of me. So I use the analogy of eating. I'd say the same thing with sports.
Yeah.
Like we have, as parents, we have the responsibility as the wise, the adults in the conversation to recognize when it is becoming too pervasive, too all consuming in their lives. Yeah. And even though I have the desire to see my son better at soccer, so that I have that feeling of him scoring more goals, I also have to moderate my emotional connection to seeing him score a goal to the balance of, well, he needs to study as well. And he needs to do other things in his life. And this can't be all consuming because he's not going to be the next Messi.
My dad, one of our rules growing up is you can play on any team you want, any sport you want. Sunday morning, you'll be in church.
Yeah.
And there was, for a little while, I was a halfway decent pitcher. This will be hard to imagine, but I was, for 2 years of my life, I was a really good pitcher. It's not hard
to imagine.
Okay.
That's just obvious.
Well, and I remember an all-star game that was a Sunday all-star game. And I remember the conversation to this day. Dad said, we made this commitment, and I know being the all-star pitcher would be a big deal, but we need to honor this commitment. And we did. And I missed the all-star game, but looking back on it now, it taught me something about priorities, right? Yeah. It taught me something about priorities.
It's a valuable lesson.
Yeah. And I don't know, I'm not saying you never miss church to go to a thing, but I think as parents, man, you're teaching your kids what matters and what doesn't.
Yeah.
And
this conversation has gotten a little bit harder because when I was in sports growing up, there was a rule in the schools, no Wednesday night games and no Sunday
morning games.
What ended up happening was all the club teams were like, opportunity. We'll do all our games on Wednesdays and Sundays.
Right.
So that boundary has not been created from somebody else.
Right.
We now have the heavier burden of creating the boundary when our friends are not creating that boundary for their kids.
Yes. And it's a different conversation. When I was a long time ago when I was a kid. So
long
now,
Sage.
But now you almost can't even participate in a sport if you aren't willing to give up some weekends. Now the sacrifice is bigger than me missing one All-Star game. Yep. So let's be real with that. And we don't expect, do you attend church 52 Sundays a year?
No.
I don't attend church 52. So
I'm not going to church this Sunday.
Well, there you go. There you go. There's a conversation about this. And we understand, again, this isn't a law.
Right.
The idea of weekly church was not in the 10 Commandments either. Right?
Yep.
So, but it's a conversation about priority. It's a conversation about the place athletics and other activities will be in your life.
Yep.
So,
absolutely. Wisdom, balance, maturity.
Wisdom.
Yep.
Yeah. Gain all wisdom.
Yep. Gain
all wisdom. And then I'm free.
Yep. Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Wherever you're watching this from, whatever situation maybe you found yourself in a place that something has gotten unbalanced, an addiction, or you have spent too much time on something. The goal is not to condemn you for that reality. The goal is to help you to recognize that something has gotten out of balance in your life and seek help. Seek support. Surround yourself with people who will hold you accountable and help you realize when you've gone overboard in something. Because the reality is it can cause a tremendous amount of pain. Tons of pain in our life is caused by people who have just allowed themselves to consume something too much, to do something too often. And so just build that boundary to keep that pain from coming later in life. It's not a judgmental, legalistic, you're sinning, so you're going to go to hell. No, it's more about let's avoid that unnecessary pain. So surround yourself with people who can support you. And thank you for joining us today. Have a fun time watching the Super Bowl. And you should know that Jesus loves you unconditionally and he died to give you new life.